Afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor.
How y'all doing?
Fine, how are you, sir?
Great, doing well. Thank you. Woohoo.
Hello, Mr. Mayor.
You doing okay, Greg?
I couldn't be better.
Awesome.
Yes.
Excellent. Good to see everybody. And, Mr. Applegate, so glad you're able to join our little task force here.
I thank you for allowing me to be part of it. I feel honored.
So I guess you represent the foundation, Charleston Historic Foundation, in this matter, and glad to have you as a part of it. And maybe you heard by way of your absence or the change up from Mr. Clement to you, since you weren't here last time, we asked you to do most of the work and be our chairman.
I got that message.
So,
Whatever you need.
all right. Well, you want to run the meeting for us here this afternoon?
Sure. Do we have, I guess I wanted to make sure that we have everyone who we need present. So it looks like we have Councilman Del Chapo, and how about Councilman Mitchell? Is he on?
I do not see Councilmember Mitchell.
Okay. Has anyone spoken, Edmund? Anybody know? Or Ms. Bailey, you know whether?
I spoke to him and he does know about it. I'll give him a call. And Latanya Gamble is signing on right now, but I'll give Councilmember Mitchell a call right now.
Okay. And we have Ms. Gamble here signed on.
Just joined us, yes. Hey, Latanya.
Hey, good afternoon. And then Mr. Granada. And looks like we have Ms. Anderson here and Mr. Massillon. So the commission is here absent Mr. Mitchell. I don't know if you guys, do we want to hold on for a minute, see whether he can be located, or would you like to proceed, Mr. Mayor?
Well, I think Liz is trying him right now. I can hear her in the other room trying to reach him. So, but I think it's okay to proceed. The early part will be the inspection report, which I know he's gotten a copy of already.
Okay, well, excellent. I guess this thing, is this meeting broadcast, I guess, Mr. Mayor? Are there people watching?
It is a public meeting, and it's
Okay.
being recorded as well, so that folks will be able to come back and listen to it if need be.
Okay, well, I guess just for the benefit of the public, good afternoon, everyone. My name is William Applegate, and honored to be serving as the chair on this commission to look at the smokestacks. And obviously, it's a very interesting part of our city. And these smokestacks had been obviously decommissioned back in the 50s, and the city and the people of Charleston have been working to preserve them for over 6 decades. And now we're a little bit at a crossroads and trying to figure out how to deal with them. We've got a wealth of information that has been provided by some of the people here on the committee. And there's just a lot to look into. So I know we have an incredible amount of information to review and to go over and to consult and to analyze. And as we analyze what we're going to do and give the commission an opportunity to make a recommendation to the city. And I know that goes, we have big picture issues here looking at the stormwater and flooding in this area, the Grace, bridge corridor being a super important part of the city. So, what we do here is very important, and it's an exciting opportunity. And I know the city's been studying this issue hard for 4 or 5 years as far as how do we manage these issues. And so we look forward to getting all the information that we can get our hands on and being able to make a very thorough and smart decision, hopefully to preserve the smokestacks and to preserve this important part of the city. So with that, we have on tonight's agenda, or this afternoon's agenda, hopefully review and update that we're going to be able to get from Mr. Bennett as far as a lot of the work he's done. And hopefully we're going to be reviewing some of the proposals and estimates that the city has collected over the years, as well as some of the funding sources. Hopefully we're going to be able to talk about the potential funding we have here, and then get into a discussion on the timeline that we need to get through this project and be able to make recommendations. So we have a busy little schedule, and I guess the first thing of order we need to do here is to review and approve the November 19th meeting minutes. And, I guess for the process, if somebody could, since I wasn't here, but I'll ask the commission if they can, if everyone has reviewed the minutes, and then if someone could make a motion in a second.
I move for approval.
Okay, thank you. Councilwoman Del Chapo has moved for approval of the minutes. Has everyone had a chance to review? Do we have a second?
Second.
Honestly, I didn't see him, but I'll go with Councilmember Del Chapo's assurance that they accurately reflect our meeting from before.
Okay, was that a second, Mr. Massillon?
Yes.
Okay, and all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have approved the meeting minutes. And then, we were going to confirm everyone has received the inspection reports. Is everybody in the commission received the inspection reports?
Got it.
Okay. And I guess as a housekeeping matter, I guess I do want to make sure at some point that we can circle up, and maybe I'll send an email later, but I want to make sure that if there's any information that anybody on the commission doesn't have, I'm still kind of piecing together, make sure I have everything we need. But as far as estimates and proposals, I'm going to ask Mr. Most if you can verify that and maybe update any of the Dropbox that you've sent to make sure that everything related to the commission as far as proposals and bids and anything else that would be relevant, and obviously the inspection reports are in the Dropbox that we all have access to. That'd be great. And now we'll move to the main part of the show here. Mr. Bennett, if you want to please present your updates and comments on the report.
I'll be glad to. Good. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let's see. I'm going to do this if I may. I've got a brief group of slides that I'd love to use. If I don't know whether. Let me see if I can simply share my screen from right here. If I can, that would be the simplest. And if not, I might have to ask you to figure out how to give me permission. No, it turns out the host has to give me permission. Ms.
Yes,
Bailey,
sir.
or
I'm going to make you a co-host right now, and that should solve it for you.
great, thank you. Let's see if that worked. Oh my goodness, yes. Okay, share screen number 1. Good. Is everybody looking at pictures of the cracks?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Wonderful. Okay, good. What I'd like to do is first even before we go into where we are on this thing, in terms of the reports that we got back from International Chimney on their inspection, there were no surprises there. I think we we pretty much, we've gotten, we've seen that the south chimney is in, the internal liner is in slightly better condition than that of the north chimney, but likewise quite damaged, and also, excuse me, also at significant risk that if it were to collapse, it could take out the shell of the chimneys, which would be a very dangerous situation. So in any case, let me go ahead and go on in and talk about what I think is most important, which is how do we move forward. And what we've been charged with doing is this. We've been charged with developing a set of drawings and specifications for the repair work on these chimneys, for the restoration of the chimneys. And we are going on that now. And we have, what I'll do is run you through the current status of that. And we'll show you the where we think, and I'm going to have to move the camera over here, okay, and show you what the schedule looks like and what cost estimates look like. And at this stage, we have cost estimates that we ourselves have presented, have developed for the city back in September. We have additional cost estimates from International Chimney, or updated cost estimates from International Chimney, and we'll share all of those. Okay, and then I'll stop for questions. As you know, we've got two chimneys, one from the 1930s, one from the 1940s. They've been evaluated by a number of firms. We have completed, at this stage, conceptual design for restoration of those chimneys. We're in the design development phase, which is a phase where we're doing a lot of calculations and coming up with the general, the more specifics of the approach to making sure those chimneys stand. And our next phase, and actually we're already starting into that, is the contract documents phase, where we develop the actual drawings and specifications that will go out to bidders. And so we'll look at that. Let's look at the review of the construction work that's going to be required. We're going to demolish the liners of the chimneys. We're going to repoint the interior, repair the exterior, install the vertical tie-down straps within the chimneys, and repoint the exterior shell of the chimneys, and install new horizontal bands, remove the old ones, repoint any areas that were missed because of the bands, and then do a bunch of smaller tasks, and I'll go over this. Okay, first, this is one of the existing chimneys. Only one of the two is shown right here, but there are two of them, of course. Our first thing we'll have to do, a contractor will have to do, is to go in and remove the liners that are there now, demolish those liners. That's going to be a pretty tricky operation, because if you all saw the pictures last time of the liners, and you know that they're very close to failure. In some places, the bricks have already started peeling away. In some places, some of them have already fallen. If we have a failure of that liner, that would cause the whole thing to peel off and collapse. It really stands a real serious potential for taking out the shell of the chimneys, either one of the chimneys, and there would be a catastrophic failure if that were to happen. And so we realize that we cannot get in there and simply just push bricks until they until they fall. It'll be a matter of disassembly. And the people who do it, do this kind of work. One of them, International Chimney, has said, or now ICC, Commonwealth is the name of the company, but they said they've actually had one of these chimneys where they were quite concerned that this was going to happen, and that they were going to have a catastrophic failure of the liner. And so they were actually disassembling from a bucket hanging from a cable on a crane. And sure enough, the thing did, that's exactly what happened. The liner collapsed, it took out part of the chimney, and they were left sitting in a bucket up in the air and held by a crane with no chimney beneath them. And so it is a particularly risky operation doing that. We after that's done, though, the interior of that exterior shell is going to have to be repointed all the way around on the interior. I'm going to grab this, and okay, there we go. Okay, and then after that, we'll repair the cracks in the exterior shell of the chimney, as you saw in the very first slide. As a matter of fact, there we go. There's severe cracking in there. As a matter of fact, this and this, these are remnants. And here we're seeing the same thing. These little pieces of steel are remnants of the ladder that used to go up the outside of the shell and was cut off. Well, that ladder corroded pretty badly. Unfortunately, when this was done, they didn't take the pieces out, and they've continued to fracture the outer shell. Let me run forward and catch up to where we were. Okay, so that is going to have to be repaired, and that will involve taking out some bricks and replacing those. Then we'll install vertical straps inside the chimneys. And here you can see, yeah, these will be steel straps down in the chimneys, and these straps will be tied. As a matter of fact, let's see, it's pretty hard to see down here, but these straps will actually be tied down into the base, into the pile cap at the base of the chimney. That's about 12 or 13 feet underground. Those are going to be there to resist overturning of the chimney in either wind or seismic event. Then we'll come in and we'll go to the outside again, and we'll repoint the chimney on the outside. We'll repoint between the existing horizontal bands. After that, we'll come in and put in new horizontal bands, stainless steel bands that'll have a much greater life than what's there now. And those will be about every 5 feet going up the chimney, roughly the same spacing that's there now. And then we'll go back in and remove the existing bands after the new ones are in place and holding everything together. We'll remove the old ones, and we'll come back in and we'll repoint the masonry where those used to be. Then there'll be a number of small things that'll need work. After that, we'll have to install a new roof. Actually, we won't install a new roof. We'll reinstall the existing roof that we'll be taking down, and we'll have to replace the steel. There's some steel in several places. Here you can see it over in this area. You can see it here. That's in very bad condition, and is doing a lot of damage, a lot of structural damage to the masonry down at the entry. And so after that steel's replaced, we'll repair the masonry. We'll install an access door so we can get in the future. We'll fill the base with with flowable fill, which is just a very weak concrete, because we'll need to add a lot of weight down there and to help resist overturning. And we will, if need be, repair the foundation. We've looked pretty carefully at this, and we don't believe there's any foundation damage, but in reality, we're going to actually have to go down and do some inspection down there, just to confirm that we don't have a problem. Okay, let's look at this. I want to talk about. Every owner wants to know, how long is this going to take and how much is it going to cost? And most owners really don't care at all about all the stuff we've just been showing you. And I suspect you guys are much more concerned about how long is it going to take and how much is it going to cost. Let's go through this. Okay, right now, we've done the conceptual design. We've repriced the, we're doing design development drawings. And in January, we will have finished the design development drawings. We'll be well into the contract documents, the drawings and specs. And you guys will have the joyful task of making a recommendation to the city. Go or no go, that is, go with a demolition or go with a restoration. And we will not at that time in January have bids. The contract documents will not be that we're not going to be able to get the contract documents completely ready for bidding and get them out to bid and get bids in all before you guys have to make a recommendation. But we're going to continue to update pricing so that you have a real good idea as to what to expect. The contract documents will be out to bid after that. And I suspect that it will be a number of weeks. Generally, we figure somewhere in the neighborhood of 3 to 4 weeks once the full contract documents are available before bidders will actually give the city their prices. It'll take the city a while to have a contract prepared and signed with a contractor. And by sometime in April, is my expectation the city will have a contract for construction with a notice to proceed and mobilization by the contractor in May. If the city says we want to demolish these chimneys, right now we're getting an anticipated total construction time of about 7 months, about 3 months to go in and remove the liners in the chimneys, and about another 4 months to go in and take the chimneys down. That would take roughly June till December. Or if the city says we want to go ahead and do the restoration work on the chimneys, that's a total roughly 11-month project. They're still going to have to go in first and take those liners down. The good thing is that the very first job is in taking the liners down. And that is something that will be done June, July, August, well before we get into the height of the hurricane season. They are the most dangerous thing there, and they will be down, and everything in this work is designed so that the further we go into the project, the safer it becomes. And so we're focused on very first thing, let's make this as safe as possible. So as we start getting into the latter parts of construction, we have significantly reduced risk of a serious problem by the time we get into September, October, November. costs, excuse me. Okay, back in September, we had some conceptual estimates. We had demolition costs estimated at about $0.6 million. As alternative, we looked at several different estimates on restoration. One of them was at 2.8 million, another one, or just above 2.8 million. A second one was just below 2.8 million. And a third one was about 2.3 million. These were, and I want to point this out because this is really important. These were construction cost estimates. And I realized that back in September, the city said, well, let's not forget that we also have to deal with a total project here, not just the construction cost. And I'll go into that just a minute. And so the city actually had some higher figures, I think, on some of this. In going in now, rough order of magnitude costs, we've gone to, before we'd gone to one company that had not disassembled a chimney before, and we had these figures of 0.6 million. In talking with International Chimney that has done this before, they've said, we think that this is actually about a $1.4 to $1.5 million total cost if we take those chimneys down to the ground. And they said, this is what we think it actually is going to cost. If we do restoration work on these, we think we're looking at the 2.6 to 2.7 million. I mentioned a minute ago that these are construction costs, project costs, and I don't know how many of these the city has. Mr. Mayor, I think you are probably in a better position than I, or maybe Mr. Most is, and maybe I'll knock on the door for both of y'all to ask for a little bit of help with this. Some of these are realistic costs for the city, some are not. But certainly we know that a project cost would include construction cost, plus if there are any financing costs, plus any fundraising costs. I know that when we met a month ago with this group, the instruction was that half the cost would have to come from somewhere else. And so if there are fundraising costs, then certainly those go into a project cost. If there are relocation costs for local residents at critical times during the construction, when anything is particularly risky, then that would, those costs would go into a project cost, as would any loss of use costs for the St. Julian Divine Community Center. And then there are also direct costs that the city has, traffic control, security, that kind of thing. I have talked more than enough. I'm going to be quiet and stop and take questions and comments and say thank y'all for letting me talk for just a minute or two, for a few minutes. Councilwoman Del Chapo, I saw your hand come right up. Yes.
When you were speaking earlier about the interior lining,
Right,
and how sensitive doing that work is, can you put any kind of percentage around, like percent likelihood of failure? Do we know anything like that of what?
Ouch.
So that I don't see workers suspended in midair in a bucket and a pile of bricks underneath, 100 feet below them.
Yeah, exactly. Right. No, I can't. But it's a wonderful question. And why don't I take it back to a couple of different sources? I do know this. I know that when we were talking with a local demolition company that had not disassembled a chimney before, when we were talking with them back in the end of the summer, and jot a quick note, percent likelihood. Okay.
Listen, I'm with you if I don't write it down right away.
It's gone forever. In any case, when they were quite concerned, and they first came up with one price based on scaffolding the outside, or another price based on putting a scaffolding on the chimney and working their way down. They realized, boy, there's a tremendous amount of risk with that.
Mm-hmm.
Then they came up with a price of scaffolding the whole exterior, and I think they've also realized at that time that that if we lost a chimney, it would take out the scaffolding too,
Right.
and so there was a lot of risk associated with that approach. I'll be honest, I don't remember where they finally ended up in terms of their thoughts on risk. I do know that ICC Commonwealth said that their approach is that they would go down inside the chimney in the basket and would work in such a way that they would be actually bracing the brick as they worked their way down.
Okay.
So that, which I thought was a brilliant approach,
Mm-hmm.
that their approach was that they would brace it in such a way that they would prevent its collapsing catastrophically, or they would do everything they could to, there are never any guarantees and stuff like this.
Of course.
Yeah. And, we all know that construction is dangerous, plain and simple. And it really is. And I've been reminded of that, unfortunately, several times in my life.
I know.
And
Mr. Bennett, can you unshare your screen?
oh, I'm sorry.
No,
Yes,
no
of course.
problem. I'm thinking now we can
Yeah.
get back into discussion, then we can all
Yeah. Let me see how I do that.
there.
Oh, yeah.
And-
Stop share. There it is.
And
Yeah.
Councilman, feel free to continue with your question.
Sure, thank you. So I don't, if there is any kind of, data around that can be shared. And then those vertical straps that you were talking about, do those become permanent, or they're
Yes.
just there while you do the work?
No, those are permanent. And
Okay.
and those are there, and they'll be connected into the shell.
Okay.
We're going to connect them into the shell at many spots, and we're looking somewhere in the neighborhood of every 2 to 5 feet
Mhm.
up the shell. Each one would be connected, and the objective with those is this: brick masonry will carry compression, but it does not carry tension, which is pull. It just doesn't do it. And the severe wind calculations, the hurricane calculations, show that if we had a hurricane that gave us the kind of wind that our building codes today require us to design for, those chimneys would not survive. They would tip. We'd have tension in them.
Mhm.
And they'd collapse. And so these steel straps will prevent that. They're in there specifically to tie the top half of the chimney down to the pile cap.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
Others?
you.
Good. No, thank you. I always welcome
I have a
these.
question.
Yes.
Hi, my name is Latanya Gamble. If we were to restore the chimneys, how long before they would need repair again? We went through this whole process.
Sure. Ms.
What's the
Gamble.
lifespan?
Yeah, Ms. Gamble, it's the chimneys are going to need maintenance. But my objective is that they would never need, in the lifetime of anyone on this call, this level of work again. You know, we sometimes say in our business, in our firm, that, and it happens pretty regularly, we find that when we're doing major structural work on stuff, we are generally we're doing the kind of work that hasn't been done usually in well over 100 years. Now, in these chimneys, that's not the case. They're not that old. But our objective is that we do the kind of work that will mean that no one's going to have to do this level of work again within the lifetime of anybody here, 70 to 100 years. Now, the chimneys will need maintenance. They're going to need repointing from time to time. We're going to have to refill in the gap around the top of those small straps on the outside of the chimneys. But our objective is that we use materials that will survive the weather and not require this level of work anytime soon. Mr. Mayor, you had your hand up also.
Well, thank you, Craig. I appreciate the presentation and work you've done on this already. I did have a couple of questions, and just following up first on the comments already. I think the question, Councilmember Del Chapo, is very important to get some sense of the risk when that deconstruction occurs, just to think about whether the street should be closed or and all those kinds of things. And I guess that almost goes without saying, but that's a real important consideration to me, to us, just from a safety point of view.
Yes, sir.
And Ms. Gamble's question, I hear your response, but just from considering the whole cost for the city, it would be helpful to at least have some projection. Well, you know, every 10 years, you got to do this. Every 20 years, you got to do that. You ought to check on this, because we don't want to get in this situation again. I mean, nobody ever prescribed to the city since they were built in the 30s and 40s. So this is what you ought to do to maintain these chimneys.
Right.
And, it would be nice to have, you know, literally a maintenance schedule of what would be required for the next generations, just to make sure that we don't get in this crack again, no pun intended. Thirdly, I did want to ask you, and I think you mentioned you thought that the southern one, the one we have the report on now, is in a little better shape than the northern one. Is that correct?
Well, the liner is not quite as precarious.
No.
It's not in good shape by any means,
Right.
but it's not quite as close to collapse. Yeah.
One thought that had been brought up at the last meeting, I believe, or some comment along the way, was the possibility of keeping one and taking one down.
Sure.
So if you were to keep one, which one would it be? And number two, on the pricing, is it as simple as dividing both of those costs in half and dividing and adding those two things together, which if I do it, I come to about $2 million. You got a net cost on the demo of about $750 per stack, and you got a net of about 1.3 million per stack to reconstruct. Is it as simple as saying 750 plus 1.3 would be the projected cost if you took one away and kept one?
Well, I'll go ahead and I'll take each of the questions in terms of street closures. Yes, sir. There will be a need for street closures, and there will be there'll be also a need at times to close the St. Julian Divine Community Center. And I can conceive of critical times when we would even ask residents not to be in their houses at certain critical times and for short periods. I don't see that as happening for any protracted period.
Mr. Bennett,
Yes, sir.
while we're on that, just so we're all clear, I assume from what you're talking about that that's regardless of which path we take. I mean, that's built into the demolition program. If we demolish them, that we're going to have that problem.
Yes,
or if
sir.
we restore them, it's the same. It's going to be pretty much the same issue.
Yes, sir. That's absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Yeah. And
sorry to interrupt.
No, that's great. And and realistically, the riskiest time is when we disassemble that liner.
Right.
That's the riskiest time in each chimney. So yes. Now, second question, Mr. Mayor, maintenance schedule. I agree with you that maintenance schedules are absolutely wonderful. Enforcing them, that is, doing them is a whole lot harder than writing them. I'll tell you that. Yeah, as people used to say about software, easy to use is easy to say, but I agree with you. A maintenance schedule makes all the sense in the world. I would see that there would be a need to do an exterior inspection of the chimney once a year. I would see a need to do an internal inspection of the chimney, maybe every 5 to 10 years. And I would see a need to do repointing work on the chimney probably every 20 or 30 years. And but I think it's important that we do spell that out and in such a way that it can be maintained. Finally, in answer to your question, what if we keep one? Well, the costs that we had up here a few minutes ago, where we talked about rough order of magnitudes of demolition at 1.4 to 1.5 million and restoration at 2.6 to 2.7, those were not additive. The restoration cost did include the internal disassembly of the liners, and so it was an either or, not a both and.
Right.
And so now, getting to the question of one of them is more expensive than half of both. If I had to reach up and grab a number, I would say my guess is going to be somewhere in the neighborhood of 60 to 65% of the cost of keeping two of them. Gotcha. But that's just reaching up and grabbing. And, please don't anybody write that down, okay? But that really is just a guess. Let's see. I think that handled all three. Were there other? Yeah. Did someone else have a hand up? Yes, sir. Yes, Mitchell, sir.
Yeah. So even if you keep both versus the one, it don't seem like the price going to make too much difference. One versus both.
Yeah, it's probably, I'm going to reach up and say it's somewhere that we really are probably in the 60 to 65% range just to do one, because there's a lot of mobilization cost with getting down and just getting on site and doing the work. Yeah.
And then secondly, even when the work is being done, if it's going to be done or not, the with the residents around that area might have to be moved. You have to probably secure that area. And you also have a business there that you're going to have to probably close for a while or whatever the case may be. And they're going to lose business there too. So I don't know who's going to, even take that up. If they want someone to pay for them losing the business for the business aspect there, which is Hannibal's restaurant.
Yeah.
And so you're going to probably have to close that whole area because that's right next to the smokestack, if you may.
Yeah.
So, all these things I'm looking at because this is what they're asking me. And
yeah, these are important questions. They really are. I'm trying to remember. Councilman Mitchell, is Hannibal's? I can't remember. Does it fall within that roughly 200?
Yes, it does.
Range? Okay.
Yes, it does.
I don't see the likelihood that there's going to be a long-term closure of residences in that area or of the business in that area. What I see it, well, to give you some idea, when we did I'm not going to name the project, but there's a 1920s building here in town, concrete building that everybody knows. And it's about 6 or 7 stories high. And a few years ago, we had to replace some of the basement columns and some of the first floor columns in that 6 or 7 story building. And what that meant was we had to go up to the second floor, grab the columns and lift one at a time, lift a column about 1 to 2/100ths of an inch, and then go in and put a new column up underneath it. And when we did that, we actually required that everybody get out of the building for a few hours at a time. And we had to do that on, somewhere between half a dozen and a dozen different columns. And each time it was a matter of all the occupants of the building had to leave for roughly 5 hours at the time.
Yeah, with my aspect, with the age of these 2 smokestacks, and with the deterioration of what's happening to it, once they start working on it, we can't project exactly what's going to happen. We're just talking about it, but we don't know what's going to happen when they start working on it. It might be when they start pulling bricks down or trying to put inside of it, trying to restore it, something else might fall. And my thing was always a safety factor for the people in that area, that close proximity to that smokestack. And that was my main issue, is safety, because I didn't want one brick, nothing to fall on anyone around there and have them on my conscience. And that was my dilemma on this, dealing with this smokestack period, and that's why I look at it very seriously when it comes to, like I always say, a human being versus those type things. And
yes,
that
sir.
was my dilemma on it,
Yeah, well, Councilman Mitchell, you're absolutely right that it's no matter what, we've got a life safety issue that we have to deal with.
Right.
And it really doesn't matter whether we do a restoration or a demolition, we've still got pretty serious issues that we've got.
Correct.
Yeah.
Mr. Bennett, is there a way that you can study and get back to the commission just some idea, some clarity to the councilman's question on timing of potential closure, or
Yes, sir.
what it looks like as far as that fortification process might be, and maybe what that duration looks like. I mean, I know you can't be held to anything, but maybe just to elucidate a little bit what it's trying to figure out, which I think is a great point.
Yeah, I'd be glad to. And let me jot this down. Okay, yes, so the timing on the serious life safety issues during construction in particular.
Greg, would it be likely when you do that deconstruction of the inner liner that they do one stack and then the other? I mean, from a timing point of view, I guess it gets down to the contractor a little bit.
Yeah.
Is it feasible or recommended or not recommended to try to do them both at one time?
Well,
I'm just thinking that's when your highest risk is.
It is.
Kind of get it all over with at the same time if you were doing them together. If you did one, you got that same issue when you come back to do the other, you know?
Yeah. Well, you know, it's a real good point. There are two sides to this coin. One is that you've got significant risk in two areas that you're going to have to watch at the same time. That would make me a little nervous, but there is that downside. There's also the good side to it, though, that you are certainly inconveniencing anyone locally for much less total time. And I think that's worth pursuing. There's no doubt in my mind that it would be more expensive because they'd have to have two cranes and working, and there'd be much more equipment on site. But you know, it makes good sense to minimize the problems that you're going to cause for everybody in that area. It really does. And Councilman Mitchell, I think that's the kind of thing that is well worth looking at, with respecting the fact that nobody in that area wants to be grossly inconvenienced. Yeah. Okay. Good.
Ms. Campbell has her hand up again.
Oh, Ms. Gamble, yes.
Ms. Campbell, you might be muted. Unmute yourself.
Thank you. You said that the timeline would be probably June through December. Will that impact, what stage would we be during hurricane season? Is that the start of the project?
Well, it depends on the path taken, and I'm going to look back over at my notes over here for a minute. And as a matter of fact, I'm going to, if the chairman will allow me, I'm going to share this screen again for just a moment. And then there we go, one share. And I'm going to probably forget to unshare it, so I'll have to be reminded, Mr. Chairman. But yeah, if we look at a demolition, we would be June, July, August, that we would be taking the liners down. If we look at a restoration, it would be June, July, and August that we would be taking the liners down. And that is unquestionably the riskiest part of the work. And when we get those liners down, we will have significantly reduced the risk of a very serious problem in hurricane season. Because it's what would have brought the liners down is the movement back and forth in a wind event, in a hurricane, of the chimneys. So we're going to significantly increase safety by getting the liners down June, July, and August before the worst of hurricane season hits. I think the peak of hurricane season is in late September. My recollection is that it's September 20 some odd is the peak point in hurricane season. So after that, if we're doing demolition, then I would think that the shells would be somewhat down by the peak of hurricane season. And if we're doing restoration, we might very well even have the strapping in by that time. Let's see. Let me undo this. Oh, here it is. Stop share up here. There we go. Okay, we back again. Great.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Maslon or Mr. Ganata? Make sure everyone has a chance to weigh in here.
Yeah, if Mr. Granata's got anything, I'll yield to him first. No?
No, well, I yield to Mr. Bennett. Thank you, though.
And Mr. Bennett, first, I'd like to thank you for the presentation, and I'm a big admirer of your work and what you've done here, so I appreciate that very much.
Thank you, sir.
A couple of questions that occur to me. First, on the safety issue that Councilman Mitchell raised, are there any other alternatives to this procedure that would improve that? And again, you know how little I know about engineering, but is there another approach that would be safer than this one that you can think of?
Wow. I'm not aware of it. I'm confident of one thing. I'm confident that the guys who do this work want to make absolutely sure that when they are up there, that they are as likely as is absolutely possible to come home that night.
Okay.
They have every incentive to make sure that and the company does too. The company that's doing this, because there's nothing worse than losing people in a construction accident. Yeah.
And the other is more of a factual question, and everyone might know this but me, but you made some reference to information from a company that had not taken down a chimney or something to that effect. And I'm not sure I understand of the information that we've got, what that is. Where can I see that, or how can I identify that?
Yeah, we actually went to, I believe it was a couple of local demolition contractors, but it was back in the summer, and this is Christmas. But my recollection was that there was no one to whom we spoke locally who had actually disassembled a similar industrial chimney.
And then my last question kind of ties in with that. Based on what you know, if we go out regionally or nationally, are there, sorry, I got a siren.
Yeah, no, that's okay.
Would you expect there to be a number of people that would be interested in bidding on this, or are there just one or two companies nationwide to do it? What's your feel for that?
I think we'll get several bidders. My gut feel is that there will be, well, I'm pretty confident at least two, and maybe 3 or 4, or even 5 or 6 companies that would be interested in this project. I think there will be some who will be better qualified than others, and I think it's going to be particularly important to us that we actually write into our specifications that any company bidding on this has got to show us that they are qualified to do this work, that they actually have done it before, and that this is not a first time for them.
Okay, thank you. Those were my questions. I appreciate it.
Good. Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Maslin.
I had one question, Mr. Bennett, and that was just
yes, sir.
As it relates to, I guess, some of these different issues. Did you consider, I guess, all of the different options as it relates to, for example, inside the in the interior, as far as repairing the interior and repointing? Are there cheaper alternatives, putting in sort of like a mortar sleeve as opposed to putting in vertical bands? Are there different options, not just in that one area, but throughout the project? It seems as if you've constructed a plan that is probably in the best interest because it's going to last the longest. But just curious for us to be considering, is there a plan with any other alternative?
Yes, sir, there is. And it's not one I recommend, but there are alternative approaches. And one of the approaches that we considered, or there were two approaches that we considered that both involved, well, let's see. One approach involved sliding a sleeve, steel sleeve, down inside the chimney. We looked at that. I'm not convinced that we could get a good connection between that sleeve and the outer shell in a way that would actually accomplish the objective that we've got. One way to get that connection, of course, is to fill the void between the steel sleeve and the outer shell with some sort of a mortar. In this particular case, that's particularly difficult because there's so much weight that we'd be adding, and that we grossly overload the foundations. Another approach is a gunniting approach, in which you spray concrete onto the brick. This is an approach that has been used here in this city on a fair number of buildings. We ourselves have not used that approach. Mr. Applegate, I actually attend every year the Association for Preservation Technology Conference, and I usually try and take everybody in my office to that. Some years it's 1 year it's in Canada, then the next 2 years it's somewhere here in this country. Such an important conference. The Preservation Engineering Technical Committee of that group raises pretty regularly, how can we possibly educate the other engineers here in this country who are doing this kind of work, but don't understand what a terrible thing that does to the buildings and what an immense amount of damage it causes. And we go back and forth about how can we educate people about that. We've worked on buildings where we've had to go in and do major structural work on the buildings. And I can think of one case about 20 years ago where we had to do over $1 million worth of work on the building because the brick outer veneer of the building had grown relative to the concrete frame. The two had been tied together and it had broken the connection between the two. And we had a 98-foot high brick flag that flapped in the breeze. And you can imagine the safety problems associated with that. And what happens is brick grows over its lifetime. Now this brick has already grown, but concrete shrinks, and any new concrete that you would spray onto the inside of that shell would shrink, and it would debond. It would debond, and when it debonded, it would damage the brick as it went, and no one would ever see it. It would happen, and it would be uninspectable and irreparable. As I've told a few people, I said, when you do that, you've just signed a death warrant for the building.
Well, thank you very much for that, Mr. Granata. I
Mr.
think you're
Quinn?
muted.
Thank you, sir. Yeah, you know, on this note, I thought maybe Craig, you had talked about it, you know, during your presentation, and I'm glad you all brought this up. Is, you know, when looking at your design, Craig, and going through it, I know there's the preservation side, right, preserving it, but also you talked about the design and adding the elements that will bring the structure closer into compliance with building codes and make it safer, right, for events in the future.
Yep.
And exactly where we are today, right? Yeah. That was what wasn't thought of back when these were built. And so I guess I just, you know, maybe you could reiterate or just what we've been talking about, your design and what you're offering. That is part of it, is the preservation, though, but it's also about making these stacks safe, to at least to the point much closer to withstand some of the events that we expect and expect in the future. It's all part of this, right? It's not just, you know, preserving it and making sure it's maintained, but also bringing that structure much closer into code compliance and
yes, sir,
withstand events in the future.
Yeah, Mr. Granata, the objective with the vertical straps that we would put inside the chimney, the steel straps, would be that we be able to handle the overturning loads that come with wind and seismic too. And we're sizing those for that loading. And in this case, it's a wind loading that is most severe, because we're going to lighten this structure significantly rather. And so those would prevent the overturning and prevent the loss of the top 50% roughly of the chimney. The horizontal bands around the outside would carry the shear in seismic events. And so we've really, they not only tie together where we've had splits down the chimneys, but also give significant capacity for seismic events. Yeah, they really do. And so we'll be able, I believe, to design for the full current wind loading. As far as seismic, there's some actual requirements that we never will, or very likely be unable to meet on a technical basis for seismic, because we're required to have reinforcing in the joints every 16 inches. And I think that with the bands every 5 feet, we're going to get the shear capacity we need. Yeah. And good. Did I say, Mr. Tito, did you have your hand up, or was I mistaken? Oh, okay, thank you. Sorry. Okay.
If I may ask a question, this is Deborah Anderson.
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
With the sleeve that you spoke about a moment ago,
yeah,
cost-wise, if there was a way to actually successfully do that, how much money would we save? Would it be feasible?
It would probably actually be, my gut feel is it would be a more expensive approach. I think we'd probably be looking at more money to do that. And not only is the steel for doing that pretty expensive, but then you've got to make sure that if you do fill that space between the sleeve and the outer shell, that you've got to make sure that you've got you don't blow out the shell. you know, because you've got all that fluid pressure in there. So you'd have to fill it very slowly. It would be a pretty expensive process to do that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. And that's gut feel now. And somebody might come along and price it and say, oh no, we can do it for less. We did consider that, and we said we think that's a whole lot more work and consequently more cost, and not as good a system too. You know, others.
If no one else has anything, then we can probably kind of go down the agenda. But does anyone else like to ask any more questions? Mr.
Yes,
Bennett?
Chairperson, I did have one comment that I wanted to kind of bring up here. So, Craig brought up a good point about having good qualifications when it's time to bid this, and that is very important. And time obviously is very important as well too. We just have to be careful if we put too many restrictions, or if we tell them, you have to use 2 cranes, or it needs to be done in a certain time span. That has a tendency to drive up the cost. So, there's kind of a balancing act here of having, good qualifications in there and setting a schedule, but not being too restrictive, because that limits the contractor's creativity then.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Most.
Okay, then. Thank you so much, Mr. Bennett. Appreciate it. All your work on this. I guess next on the agenda was, and we may have kind of covered a lot of this, but Edmund, I don't know if you're going to chime in on this. I guess understanding and appreciate, I'm new to a lot of this and may know less than everyone else on this call. But I guess I wanted to make sure that we had a full appreciation for all of the proposals and estimates. And I guess to put in context, and I imagine we may have some discussion on this. I know there's discussion about the payment for this and how it's paid for, and whether the city pays the entire amount to preserve this property. And I don't assume we will have some further discussion about that within this commission. And in doing so, I think it would be important for us to understand, I guess, all the different proposals and estimates. I think what's clear to us at this point, from what I understand, that Mr. Bennett has presented the most comprehensive and thorough, complete estimate. But I know that or understand that there may have been estimates and proposals that date back 4 years or so, and maybe a variety of different kind of pricing options. Is that something that, Edmund, you're prepared to educate us on today?
I don't have that information, but I can respond this way. We've been engaged with Bennett Preservation for some time now. And what you're referring to is cost estimates that they've developed over time. And it's like sharpening a pencil. As we were getting further and further into this process, we were developing more and more precise cost estimates. And there was an estimate that was very early on that, on our staff, we have a construction estimator in capital projects, and we reviewed the numbers, and we disagreed with it. We went back and we talked with Craig about it. And at that time, we didn't have as detailed drawings as we have now. So that number was fairly a lot lower than the numbers that we're looking at today. And Craig, you might want to add more to that as well.
Well, the one thing I'm absolutely certain of, and that is that we will know, we'll have a very, very good idea of what it's going to cost if we put it out to bid. And until then, we're getting a lot of estimates, but it's only when we take the drawings that we're developing now and the specifications, and we put those out and people say, I will do this job for this cost. That's when you know what you're really going to have to pay.
Yeah, I think
Okay.
one to add to that a little bit more too, one item is the type of scaffolding system. So really there's three ideas that are out there. There's the crane with the basket, which is the safest of all them. There's a swing scaffolding, which basically hangs or it's strapped around the chimney and it uses tension and you can lower it down over time. And then there's scaffolding the whole entire system. And each one has benefits and drawbacks. Scaffold the entire system, you're renting scaffolding for the duration of the project on 2 chimneys. That's probably $250,000 right there alone. So that needs to get weighed back and forth between what it costs to have that size crane on site for the duration of the project, or potentially 2 cranes, and the safety factors between them as well. That's why you're seeing this varying of costs between these estimates.
Okay. Thank you, Edmund. All right, and I don't know, Edmund, if you plan to do this, or if there's somebody, Mr. Mayor, who you have who is going to present for us again as part of our duty here is to determine the cost and then the funding of it. We had on here a review of the Cooper River TIF funds and those revenues. And Edmund, is that something you're going to present on?
Mr. Chairman, I was going to take that.
Okay, thank you.
I do want to ask Edmund one question before I begin. Edmund, of the existing St. Julian Divine budget, and after taking out, Mr. Bennett, you kindly noted all those other expenses that the project costs. You left yours out. I presume you would like to get a check.
It's huge. It's the biggest one. Yes. Yes, sir, Mr. Mayor. You're absolutely right.
After we take care of contract with Bennett, how much do we have left in the project budget?
Sir, let me double check that right now. I don't know. I believe his fees are encumbered on the budget presently, and I believe that there's $700,000 left, but I'm going to confirm that right now while we're online here.
That sounds about right. So first of all, a few things, if I may, Mr. Chairman and our task force members. This matter of the smokestacks has always been part of a larger project, the renovation of the St. Julian Divine Center, which we rededicated about a week ago. And if you haven't been in the building, please go in there. It's really transformational what we've done. And with the playground side facing East Bay Street, and we rearranged the restrooms on the first floor so you could enter them without the rest of the center being open. So they're going to be available to the public, who not only in the neighborhood if needed, but also for visitors who are going up and down the Ravenel Bridge. So the overall project is really quite terrific and mostly completed already. So we have the remainder, something like 700,000 in that budget, which obviously was short of being able to complete the smokestacks, and that's kind of part of what led us here to our business. So I do want to remind everyone that when City Council approved the measure to even form this task force, it specified that half of the funds, whatever recommendation be made, that half, and you might say it was aspirational, but that half of the funds be come from the private sector or from philanthropy. And so it was not the intention, honestly, of council to foot the whole bill for this. I'll be honest with you. I just want to put that out there. The other thing that's clear at this point from our budget discussions over the last couple of months is that we have no funding in our general fund in order to pay for this extra expense to the project. So the likely candidate is, in fact, as you've mentioned, that tax increment finance or TIF district. We call it the Cooper River Bridge TIF district. Now, the history of that is we've only had one bond issuance so far for that district, which was about 2 years ago of $12 million. And in fact, $2.25 million that went into the renovation of St. Julian Divine Center, of which 700 is left, came from that first bond offering. So 2.25 has already gone into St. Julian Divine from the TIF district. Now, it's our estimate that next year we'll be able to float an additional $12 million or so bond from the district. So to make sure we get the biggest bang for our buck, we probably wouldn't do it until after April, when we get the updated annual information from Charleston County about the valuation of the district and how well it did this year. We could do it sooner, but it would be better to probably wait. So we could do a little more than 12 million. So here's the tough part of all of this. And I guess this task force will have to consider in its recommendation, but clearly city council ends up making the decision at the end of the day. I asked our staff to go through the district and look at all the public infrastructure improvements that we kind of already know about, that we would want to occur. Some of them, can be done over time, admittedly, but it included things like the flooding, the drainage improvements that we need, other improvements to park space, including the potential formation of the low-line park that was conceptual plan was presented to council the other night. Further support for our affordable housing efforts, other street and sidewalk and park improvements in the district in addition to the low line. And I hate to tell you that without going through all of that line by line, and admittedly, they're just really swag estimates. They're not based on engineering documents or specific plans. So some of them are pretty broad, but the wish list totaled $65 million, okay? $65 million. A good bit of it was for drainage. I mean, drainage improvements are really expensive, and the low line requests over time is a lot of money as well. So you got $12 million next year. Council will be able to allocate and spend. You got a wish list that's going to be much higher than that. Now, over time, the TIF district will keep producing income. I forget how many more years are on this district, maybe 15 years. So over time, I'll be honest with you, it'll probably generate $65 million over the whole lifetime of the district. But, we can only generate what we can generate, a piece at a time. So next year, we estimate we'll be able to spend $12 million, and that will from the district, and it will be up to council to review those priorities and make a decision of where to spend the money. So I did some easy, quick math on what Craig said in response to my question, and even the better case scenario of 60%, Craig, if my math is correct, the project to keep one and take one away would be 2.34 million, but likely a little more than that if it was 65%, right? So I must say, just my own back of the envelope math, there's not a lot of savings in doing one and one. I mean, it seems to me pretty clear. You either take them both away or you keep them both. is just not that kind of difference in the money. And we've got 700,000 in the project. You know, if council, if this task force recommends and council were to allocate, we'd need an additional approximate 600,000 in order to demolish them. And we'd need an additional 1.9 million to just round it up. We'd need an extra couple of $1 million, I'm sure, with some other expenses, like Craig says, that will be added to the project costs. We'll roughly easily need 2 million additional dollars. So, I mean, I think it would be a very worthwhile endeavor to restore and save the smokestacks. I'm going to say that. If we proceeded along council's original recommendation, I could, with a straight face, recommend to council next year of that $12 million to allocate 1 million of it to the smokestacks and ask for private philanthropy and all the groups, including Mr. Chairman, the foundation and the Preservation Society, who both stood up and said they would help raise money to make that happen. If we could get those groups to put $1 million in, raise $1 million, and the city put in another $1 million from the TIF district, I think that would be a really strong position and recommendation. That's my report.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I guess for now, let me open up just questions to the mayor as it relates to the TIF funds. Does anyone have questions about the funds?
I had a question. I'm not sure if it falls into this category or not, but I'll ask it. And if it doesn't, somebody can tell me that and it won't hurt my feelings. But as I understand Mr. Bennett's report, the cost to demolish these, and I agree with you, Mr. Mayor, I think saving them would be a laudable thing to do, but the cost of demolishing them would be $1.4 million to $1.5 million, roughly. And the cost to save them about $1 million more. And so not knowing anything about municipal finance, but I'd be curious for the mayor or Councilman Mitchell or Councilwoman Del Capo, is the idea that if this committee recommends not to save them, that the city would be looking for the private sector to raise half the money to demolish them? Because it seems like that's kind of a sunk cost either way, whether they're saved or they're demolished. It seems like it's going to cost $1.4 million to $1.5 million. So is the request from the private sector to raise the differential to save them versus demolishing them, or half of the overall cost, whatever it is?
Well, that's a good perspective. I'll let my council members respond.
Well, on one instance, we were looking at the total package so far as if we have to relocate people in that area if anything happened, or even when they start repairing these smokestack out with the demolition. And that's going to be another cost that we don't have in this particular budget so far as what we're talking about so far as the smokestack. That would be additional money that even the city would have to come up with. So when I first heard about the smokestack, my thing was that, hey, I'd rather see the smokestack if they want to do it, tear it down, because putting money in something that is not doing nothing for the community. But the community wants the smokestack to stay. So I went along with the community, let's do it. But we came to the consensus that if we're going to do that and keep both smokestack, we don't have the money there to repair all both smokestacks. So we said we'll put 50% of the money to repair this, to keep both smokestacks there. So that's how that came about with the smokestacks, keeping it and repairing it. And I went along with my colleague and along with the people in my community, which is the East Side community, and they wanted to see it preserved. So once they wanted to see it preserved, I said, I'm the council member, okay, I'm going along with it. But I said, it's going to be a cost factor. And I said, we could bring money from the tip, pull money from the tip, which the mayor alluded to. But I told them in the beginning, and I'll be frank with that I would not take money from drainage, and I would not take money from affordable housing to do this, you see, because those are things that is really needed now and always needed in the community. And so that was my dilemma on it. But that's, that's the way it went with it so far as the council members concerned. And so the council members look at it and say, well, we can't fit the whole bill because what this is going on now with the dilemma of the COVID-19, the budget, the way we have a budget to say, okay, we'll put 50% of what the cost to keep both smokestacks there, and other entities have to come up with the other half. And that's the way this came up out in council. So we can make sure that we keep both smokestacks standing.
Thank you.
So John, I'll also respond by saying that I certainly hear where you're coming from, and no, it was not the intention of the city to ask for private philanthropy to help us in the event we demolish the smokestacks. I get that. But consider this, if they're demolished, then we have no more maintenance or liability in the future. If we preserve them, we're committing this city for generations to come, even though Mr. Bennett says the cost would be reasonable compared to what we're doing now. But every 20 years, you got to repoint them. Every year, you got to inspect them. At some point down the road, you're going to have to rebuild them. So, we are taking on that responsibility for the future.
Thank you for that too. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I guess since we're in this discussion, a couple things I guess I'd ask about.
Ms. Gamble had her hand up again.
Oh, go ahead.
Okay, go ahead. I can see to you. I can wait.
Oh, well, thank you. I guess as we study this, and again, that's part of obviously the devil's in the details here, is trying to study it. There's some suggestion that, obviously it's a breaking with somewhat of the Charleston tradition as far as ownership of our properties, that we all have to preserve historic properties. And this city, we've been preserving and spent lots of money over the last 65 years preserving these smokestacks. So there's been a concerted effort and focus and dedication by the city to do that for 65 years. And so, again, if we're trying to look to the community now, I guess we need to fully understand what has been sort of promised or set aside. And I understand the TIF funds, and this is one thing, was dedicated to St. Julian and the smokestacks, if I understand that correctly. And I'm curious to know if we're able to look deeper into this, Mr. Mayor, and in fact, we can, and in fact, the Cooper River TIF, in fact, has what we expected it to have for affordable housing of utmost priority, for infrastructure, stormwater, and for preserving our own property. Wouldn't it be appropriate for us to be considering that as a source? As we study this, is that a source so we can understand that and how we would be able to get funds? Because as I understand our job, it's to potentially make a recommendation and then determine where the funding may come from. And if in fact the funds are there in the TIF, that would seem like an excellent solution to our issues.
Well, yeah, but as I just described, there are more needs than there are funds available right now. And if you, just to take my example, if we were to allocate another $1 million next year, then St. Julian Divine property, this one property within a big district would have received $3.25 million, you know, well over 10, 15, maybe about 15% of the total allocation from this whole district. So it's receiving a sizable, it's already received $2.25 million. It's gotten a sizable chunk from the TIF district already. And, you know, in addition to the drainage and the affordable housing, I can tell you that we're already getting advocates, you know, pretty asking for a substantial slug to help get the low line started, including Mr. Hasty the other night at City Council. So we just council's gonna have to decide those priorities.
Okay.
I would ask, if particularly the foundation and the society who are more familiar with these kinds of things, are there other preservation grants, or is there some fancy tax credit out there that could be utilized where we can somehow pass through a historic preservation tax credit to someone? If y'all can think of some other way other than the TIF district, it sure would be helpful.
And I think that's, you know, I think that's a great point, Mr. Mayor, and definitely something that is obviously, you know, something that we need to study in detail. And I think, you know, whether it's, again, I mean, you know, if it ultimately involves a sale of the property to someone who will preserve it as necessary within the directives of the, you know, the city's architectural, you know, guidelines that we've all lived by, then I think, you know, we'd have to consider that too. And, you know, I guess that goes to all of what we're focused on, is trying to make sure we can do what we need to do. That's a great point. And we need to make sure we can do what we need to do in this short period of time. So thanks for bringing that up. Ms. Gamble, you're on mute again. There you go.
I'm getting the hang of it slowly but surely. I guess my question was, as the mayor has implied that the private sector should help raise the additional funds for the smokestacks, and say this task force agree with that. What happens if we fall short? What happens to the project of that goal? I mean, like, say if that was one of the options and we tried to raise the money and we did not get the money, then what happens to the project, to the smokestacks?
Yeah, please, Councilwoman, you're on mute too, so you're.
So if we, and this was actually in our minutes from our last meeting, what was presented and accepted from council as far as kind of the rules and expectations of this task force. And it says directly, in the event funding is unable to be secured or it is determined it is not feasible to restore the smokestacks, then its demolition be reviewed through the city's normal permitting process. And also in that same adoption, the city be responsible for no more than 50% of the total cost, including design and engineering of such restoration. And I've already had conversations with private sector who would be willing to come forth, and they've reached out to me. I haven't reached out to anybody. I haven't done any fundraising efforts. So I don't think that's a big ask. And I don't think it's impossible to do.
But to answer your question,
to the mayor's point, we only have there's only so much money to go around, and my goodness, Councilmember Mitchell can tell you the same thing. Since birth, the East Side has flooded like crazy, and it continues to. Affordable housing, so how do we best manage all of these things that are needed and right in that one area. So I don't think unrealistic expectations have been set upon this task force at all. And this is what was agreed upon. And so this is what we need to do. And we don't have time on our side to study things in depth. That's what has been done up to this point. And now we have roughly a month to bring forth to council what the recommendation is and what that looks like and where those funding sources are, et cetera. So all that deep dive needs to already have been done. And I know that many of us have already been doing that.
And just if I can, I did want to put this on the agenda. There's been just conversations and that I've had and some concern just for me getting up to speed and hearing from some other folks that, you know, as we look at all the information, it does appear that obviously these recommendations were made, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, that we needed to get in here and do this stuff. And obviously we've survived without issue these 4 years. And it seems as if we may need, you know, whether it be 60 days, whatever, to get this done. That with COVID, the holidays, Christmas, and I'm kind of jumping ahead to sort of the next item on the agenda was timeline, but it seems like we may need some additional time to be able to make a final recommendation. One, so we can make sure we have these, again, funding sources, if that's the best way to do it, and if that's something we can do, or we've looked at every single option. So I just, I bring that up. I did want to talk about the last suggestion about what happens. I would assume that, again, if we didn't get some private source of funding and this did go in front of the BAR, I mean, I would assume that, you know, based on my experience, they would, as the BAR has done for decades, it would require the city to preserve these buildings. And so then you're stuck in the same boat, but you've dragged it out and increased the danger. So I just throw that out there. It just seems like the fallback is that the city is going to have to do it. Potentially, I just throw that out there and for everyone to talk about.
Well, with all due respect, just to say because nothing's happened so far doesn't mean that we have time on our side. I mean, you know, I can say, well, you know, for 44 years, I've never been, you know, I've never cracked my skull. It doesn't mean I'm never going to. So, I mean, that just is such a, you know, baseless argument. And again, when we look at the recommendations from Mr. Bennett, who is a more than highly skilled engineer and is somebody who works with architects and engineers all day, you know, 40 hours a week. This is my career. What these folks know is beyond. And I trust his recommendations implicitly. And the safety of the community and of these workers is of utmost importance. And the way that he's structuring this and putting himself up against what is a really tight timeline to do construction documents and all this, these things take, you don't even understand the hours these types of things take. The timeline that he's giving us is aggressive, and it's designed to keep his people as safe as possible. I do not feel comfortable going to council the second week in January and saying, hey, I know we were supposed to come to you by now, but I need another 60 days. I do not feel comfortable doing that. I won't speak for my fellow council members serving on this task force, but that will not get support from me. We've had enough time, and it's time for us to move forward and do something for the folks on the east side and represent their best interest and their desires.
May I ask one other question? This is Deborah Anderson again. My mother would always say that the only dumb question is the one you don't ask. So is it totally impossible that city council, can you come together to see if maybe there's a little more that you can give, especially with additional funds possibly coming in a moment towards this, so that the private side doesn't have to raise 50%? That makes it a little easier for the private sector to pull it together.
I think the order of things, Deborah, will be that council is looking for this task force to first make a recommendation, and then it will review its funding opportunities with the TIF district and make a decision from there. But Mr. Chairman, I did want Mr. Granata to address the comments you made about the BAR and the inevitability of the restoration.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. Yeah, that was, you know, we had discussions when we started reading these reports. You know, the existing condition, the condition that has deteriorated over time and gotten us to this point. And it gave me pause on how I wrote the order to the city regarding the stacks. And after talking to Craig multiple times and talking to preservation multiple times, I wrote it just like it is, that they need to come down. And that's why I think this is an aggressive time schedule. As time goes on, we run the risk for the neighborhood and everybody that's in that area at any given time of a real public risk. And so the order's there. I don't need to have BAR approve anything based on my authority to take something down that's a risk to public safety. And that's how the order's written, just so you understand. Is that what you're asking, Mayor?
Yeah, and I don't mean to put you on the spot,
No.
but I'm going to do, based upon the new reports that you've seen now as a result of being on this task force, and would you change your assessment at all?
No, sir. I mean, I think it just only validates what the reports we saw up to this point, that it is becoming, you know, it has progressed. It is getting to a point, especially, I'm probably going to say this wrong, the north stack is worse than the south stack. I hope I got that right. That one, you know, is, you know, something's going to happen at some point. It's just a matter of when and what causes it. It will happen. And I surely want to be, and again, this was a decision sitting there thinking about this letter. What side do we want to be on? We chose this side. And so I just want to make sure everybody understand that's why we're here. That's why there's this aggressive timeline. You know, and I tried to hold back on the fundraising and the time taking to raise those funds or request those funds from the private side and raising funds. I don't know if there's a time. I don't see a timeline given of when that, you know, how long we're allowing that to take. But again, I just want to emphasize that time ticks on here as we do that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bennett, just a point of clarification for me.
Yes, sir.
When you were doing your presentation, it seemed to suggest that you would think you'd go to contract in April or something like that. I don't have it memorized, but is that, would that be given some time to the commission at all? Any leeway from January 15th? That just being, you know, what your predictions were, just trying to make sure we have everything accounted for.
Yeah, that was based on the idea that the contract documents would go out to bid in February, and that roughly a month later, the city would have a final price and could start putting together a contract for construction and getting that through council. and that contract for construction would be signed in roughly April, and a notice to proceed be given in May. Now, where the task force fits in with that, I don't know, but I really wasn't focusing on where the task force fits in as much as I was focusing on just experience in how long it actually takes to get a contract pulled together, how long it takes working backwards, how long it takes to actually bid the project, and also how long it's going to take me to finish those contract documents and get them out the door so that they can be bid. Yeah.
Then how much time, and I'm speaking to the task force, how much time do we really need to come together? I mean, is this something that we have to draw out like that? Can we not come together and make a decision quickly?
Let me draw it out this way, if I may. How many folks would like to see the stacks restored versus demolished?
I would like, this is Deborah, I'd like to see them restored.
Okay.
I would like to see them restored.
Okay, so I think that's clear. We would all like to see them restored. So now it just gets down to the money. And I can tell you that the city doesn't like to sign a construction contract, which we're hoping would be done by April, unless it knows that it's got the money to do the job. We don't like to sign.
And Mayor, I didn't mean to cut you off, but that is why I said, as a task force, let's make a decision. You know, either we are going to do it or we're not, because we will need the time. And the councilwoman said that she has the individuals on the private side who are ready to move forward with putting funds up. I look at it like this. It seems like such a waste of money to spend all of that money and just tear those things down. They've been around. I'm one that grew up on that east side, and literally my parents have a business right down the street from the smokestacks. I saw them all my life. The historical value, the landmark, there's a lot to it. And some people might think, well, is it worth it? Well, I think it is. So if we as a task force can come together, we don't need a lot of time to make this decision. We see what is before us. Let's make the decision and then move forward with it so that we can give city council, the city, ample time for everything to take place and for Mr. Bennett to do what needs to be done. So it's either going to be yay or nay.
Well, it seems to me, and my vote would be yay, but I guess with the condition that council put on us, that what we would be recommending is that we take on a fundraising campaign to raise some money to help the city get the job done.
I agree.
Are y'all willing to do that?
Absolutely. And I don't think all those funds have to be secured by the fourth Tuesday in January or
Oh,
second
no, no.
council meeting. The funds don't have to be secured, but the intent for it does.
And I would respectfully say we want some commitment of funds by April.
Right.
But Mr. Chairman, you might be able to find some tax credit way or something. I'm glad to sell the stacks to somebody if they can get a tax credit by owning them, or what, if there's some fancy way to do this that would help us achieve the value, that's fine. It doesn't all have to be somebody writing a check maybe, but could you mentioned you could help us explore those.
Well,
and maybe
I'll tell you that I'm working on that as we speak, Mr. Mayor. And I'd like to see if we could figure something out. The lawyer in me kicks in, and I get concerned about a lot of things here. So this short time frame is difficult. And again, obviously, I appreciate that the council has made a decision and in many ways respect that. Obviously, just again, the lawyer kicks in, and having worked in some preservation as well, the idea that we have some precedent here that's set obviously gives me a concern. So I'd love to see a way where we're just looking at all the issues, and I just want to make sure I understand them. And that's why Councilwoman Del Chapo was concerned about the time. Is it's really been me trying to get up to speed quickly and understanding that this is all very difficult in a short period of time. I agree with Ms. Anderson that it sounds like if the job of the task force is simply to vote on whether to preserve the smokestacks, I know that I could easily articulate now, maybe unnecessarily, the reasons to do that. And it sounds like we might even have 100% agreement on that, that is what everybody here would want to do without question. So it simply boils down to this funding issue. And, I wouldn't mind a little more from you, Mr. Mayor, if you could, just to help your directive as it relates to the task force, what you think our presentation is that meets the, as Councilwoman suggested, a deadline of, say, January 15th.
Well, like you just mentioned, I think you could vote tonight and get a unanimous vote that we all want to restore the smokestacks. I think that seems clear. I would respectfully ask Mr. Chairman and John, particularly, y'all are representing the Preservation Society and the Historic Foundation, who, were very passionate about this issue in coming to council. Both of your organizations offered to help fund additional studies. And my comment at the time was, rather than help fund additional studies, let's just get on with the business, hire Mr. Bennett to figure out what the best, safest way to preserve them is. And any fundraising that occurs, let it go to the actual construction and preservation rather than, additional studies. So the city has taken on the expense to have additional assessments done, additional studies, the engineering done. And I would respectfully ask that y'all go back to your two organizations and see what the temperature is, what the commitment level is, be it through grants, tax breaks, or cash contributions to help us set a fundraising goal of at least $1 million to assist the city in getting this job done. And if we can come back with a straight face, a good faith effort to raise that money, I think that would be a fine commitment and a fine recommendation to city council that we want to restore those stacks. We want to save them. And this is how we're going to get it done. We're going to ask the city to commit X more dollars, and we're going to go out and we're going to try to raise X dollars. And maybe after you talk to your organizations, you come back and say, we can do better than that, or we can task force, Mr. Mayor, we only feel like we can get Y, or whatever it is. But I think we need to address the fund. We all agree we want to save the stacks. Let's try to drill down on how we're going to raise some extra money to make it happen.
Please, Ms. Campbell.
Am I unmuted?
We can hear you.
I just want to make sure that we do go on record, that we're going to make a decision, but we are setting a precedent. And I just want to make sure that our neighborhood is setting a precedent for historical buildings. And is this going to be the future of the city, that when historical buildings are in danger, that the city do have, and the private sector does the other half. So I just want to make sure that we know that we're setting a precedent, and that this, whatever we do tonight, will come back with other neighborhoods that may be trying to save historical structures as well.
Well, I think you're right. We're setting a precedent, and I think it's good precedent.
It's,
Go, sorry.
Mr. Mitchell?
I think Mr. Gaines, he have his hands up.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I just want to thank you, sir. This is just thinking out loud that, and there might be no validity, there might not be any validity to this, but if the impending risk is the internal fire brick, right? Taking that down, and I know this is again a cost of sequence, and I know Edmund's probably losing his mind when I say this, but if we spent the money to take this, and maybe we already talked about this, to take down the internal sleeve shaft and reduce the risk quite a bit, I believe, as we try to allow more time to find the funds and make and fix and restore the rest of it. Is there any sense to that, or making sense to that or not? I just wanted to think about that. I know there's this timepiece here, and we all want to preserve these, and that is there any benefit to that cost, timeline? I'm just throwing it out there on that note. Because mine is public safety and risk, and we talk about this time, this duality of time here. You don't have enough time to figure it out, to preserve it and raise the money. At the same time, we still have this ticking time bomb, but it's really the inner lining that is the biggest concern. And I think about the demolition, taking it down or preserving it, you got to take the liner down either way, right? And that cost. And I just don't know if there's something in there that benefits both sides.
Mr. Granado, was that directed at me on that, or?
I think so.
Just
Okay.
threw the idea out there that I don't know what it really does. I mean, do we, just put it out there. I don't know. You can take it or leave it, I guess.
Mr. Chairman, if I may,
Please.
Mr. Granado's got a really good point here that we do significantly reduce risk if we can get those liners down. There are still risks, and if we had a severe hurricane on the way, I would no question recommend to the city that anyone within the fall zone of those chimneys be have to leave that area. Yet it does significantly cut risk. There's no question about that, and it cuts risk in what I'd have to call a low threshold event. It cuts the risk that in a 60 or 70 mile an hour severe thunderstorm, there would be enough vibration that we'd have bricks fall and blow out the side of a stack. So, it really is a good point.
Greg, would it be practical to break up the restoration into two components and do one job, just taking down the inner liner, and then come back a year or two later when you raise the money and do the rest of the job?
It probably would. You'd have a mobilization cost that you'd have to do twice. The mobilization cost on this is about $60,000. When we look at that, so we're going to spend an extra $60,000 to buy some time. That's what it boils down to.
That sounds like a plan to me.
And what I would say, and Mayor and everyone, thanks for the dialogue. It's very helpful. For me as a representative of the society, I think like everybody, we would love to see these preserved. As far as the ask, the financial commitment, I certainly would need to go back to my group, my constituency, and talk to them about these things, and so I don't outrun my coverage, and tell you where we are. But in terms of timing, if we're going to pull all this together and to jump ahead a little bit, it seems like we need to try to figure out a way to get back together sometime between now and early January, I guess, to report back on the ask and perhaps on a couple homework assignments Mr. Bennett's gotten, so we can see where we are. I guess I'll throw that out there. Thank you.
I was gonna bring up our schedules, so thank you, John. Would folks feel comfortable getting back together that first full week in January, so that week of January 4th, even if it's, Thursday or Friday of that week? So our second, we're to report to council on the 26th. So if we did it late that week of the 4th, or the very first part, the week of the 11th, that we've had conversations with each of our stakeholders and we have a better understanding of what's going on, and we come to a consensus and put together what will be presented to council. And, is that enough time for folks? I mean, I know that's more than enough time for me to just pick up the phone and make a couple phone calls, but I'm not sure of other people's schedules.
Could I suggest the 13th? And I'm just throwing a date out. If everyone's sitting now, we're Zoom, so everyone's in front of their computers. So would the 13th be a possibility?
13th is good for me.
Worked for me. Should be able to get something back to you by then.
Councilmember Mitchell,
Yes, I know some might not agree with me. Some of my colleagues might not agree with me, but like I tell people, this is a district I represent, and I'm a funny person when anybody coming to the district I represent and telling me what to do. So I'm going to push, even if this doesn't happen. I'll have to push with my colleague on council if I have to do anything else differently. Since my constituent fought, and at the beginning, I said that we didn't need to have the smokestack in the beginning. My constituents wanted, the community wanted, and we said we voted to do the 50%. I'll have to fight hard, even if I have to kind of prolong something there with my colleagues. I'll talk to my colleagues pertaining to this, because they know how adamant I get with certain things. And I don't talk that much. I don't ask for things, but certain times, certain things happen in these African-American community. And so when it comes to that point, and if I have to push it further on council for time, I'm going to have to do what I got to do. So that's all I'm saying in essence of that. I know we are asking for this money. We don't have that money in our budget. We don't have it. We're trying to raise it, be coming up to 50%. But if it's going to take a little time or another week or whatever the case may be, I'm going to have to do what I have to do so far as the community is concerned. Because I'm going to be the one have to answer. No one else have to answer but except me. So this is what I'm saying in essence right now. So I'm just throwing it out front right now that I'm going to have to fight hard for the community, for the East Side community, of what they're looking for and what they're asking for. And that's all I'm saying, so that's just going to be it.
I know.
And we appreciate you, Councilman Mitchell. We really do.
So the only question I would have about the date, Mr. Chairman, would be that in the event that time is a bit of the essence, and in the event that we can come to a consensus on the recommendation the week prior, the first full week of January, say if we met on the 6th rather than the 13th, and we all agreed this is what we want to tell council, we could go ahead and let them know on January the 12th, when we meet on the 12th, and get going. But if you don't think that's enough time for y'all to check and we have a couple of conversations offline, whatever.
With the holidays, I'm concerned, just for my group, that that's going to be a very tight time schedule.
Okay.
But again, we'll certainly do our best to work as quickly as we can because, as I said, we're very supportive of what Councilman Mitchell just said, and we'd like to try to do our best to do what we can do.
Right. So the sooner we can all be on the same page, and then I'm just thinking already about that contract in April and the demolition in June, July, and August. I'd rather move sooner than later, and then have the demo in August, September, October. You follow me? So I'm
Yeah, and Mr. Mayor, I would guess to comply with our duties here. I mean, if anyone, within the commission, becomes aware of information or funding sources or, things that we can begin to consider in the meantime, that would probably be great if we want to do some sort of email share or however would be appropriate.
sure.
I don't know, but that could be very helpful. So, it sounds like we may all have a lot of work to do and a lot of things. Everyone's, thinking of the right way to solve this thing.
Yeah, and I'll just ask, because I'm not typically in this environment. Is there any reason why we can't share information without having a formal task force meeting? Like, for instance, if Mr. Bennett has something that he wants to share that he or Mr. Most or somebody can't just send it out to us without us having a formal meeting, or do we need to meet to do that?
No, I think we can share information.
Good. Then I support what William said. I think if information comes out about Mr. Bennett or revenue sources, it would help running up to the meeting to have it so we can talk to our folks about it ahead of time.
Great.
Good.
Could anybody else weigh in? I know we were kind of throwing an idea out there that might not suit y'all's schedule. But does the 13th sound possible for anyone else? I know that John said yes, and Councilwoman Del Chapo said yes. Does that work for you, Mr. Mayor, possibly?
I've got a meeting at 5:30 that day, so if we could meet at 4, and let me get on time.
Be limited. I'll be more efficient. I was not efficient, I guess, today.
Well,
my apologies to all.
No. It was important. I thought this discussion, presentation, all has been very positive, very good. I'm sorry if I talked too much myself.
Ms. Anderson, would that be something that you would be available?
Yes. And Mayor, I was holding back too, because I know I was talking today, but most definitely, yes. I just know that if we drag it out, it's just, let's spend the holidays thinking about what we'd like to see. And then we have 13 days into the new year to come together and let's just make a decision so that we can move forward.
Excellent. Councilman Mitchell, would that be appropriate for you? Okay for you? The 13th?
Yeah, 13th look pretty good.
Okay. Mr. Bennett?
I don't know, sir, that I'm going to be available that day. I've got a tentative job site visit over in Atlanta that Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. But I don't know that there's going to be a whole lot more information that you're going to need from me at that time either. And so I'd ask that you.
For example, if you decide to do all the work, the renovation work for free.
Oh.
That's a good idea.
That would be
then problem solved. It is Christmas.
Send that to us in an email. We have it in writing.
It's too late. I already processed an invoice.
my big concern is that some of the others who are working on this project are listening into this, and not a one of them is really half as much fun as I am to be around when they're hungry.
All right, well, it sounds like we are on. Thank you all so much for bearing with me and for educating me on all these issues, and appreciate it. And hope everyone has a very happy holiday and gets a little couple days off and stays safe and healthy.
Thank
William,
you.
did you remember to ask Ms. Gamble if it's good for her as well? The 13th?
Oh, she's hiding over here. You took your screen off, Ms. Campbell.
Yes, I did. I have a
I'm
lot.
sorry,
going on.
I didn't see
There's
you.
a lot going on. I don't want you to see everything. I will let you know. I don't have my schedule yet, but I think it will be okay.
Okay, we'll respond. I think Ms. Bailey just sent out a request to us. If it doesn't work, then we'll bandy around some emails and we'll find a time that works with everyone's schedule.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank y'all.
you.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.
Same to
Thanks,
you all.
everyone.
Always.
Thank
Be
you
safe.
very